The voice came from somewhere behind her, sharp and carrying, the kind of voice that expected rooms to rearrange themselves around it. "Excuse me, this is a private function." Adwoa Asante Bawadi did not turn around immediately. She had learned, a long time ago, that the first few seconds of a moment like this told you everything you needed to know, not about the person speaking, but about the room. She counted 3 beats of silence from the people around her, the kind of silence that meant no one was going to say anything. Then she turned. The woman standing behind her was perhaps 60, wearing a cream-colored blazer that cost more than Adwoa's first apartment had in monthly rent. Her hair was set in that particular way that suggested she had a standing appointment every Thursday morning. She was looking at Adwoa the way certain people look at something that has appeared on their lawn uninvited. "I know," Adwoa said. "I was invited." The woman's expression did not shift. It simply hardened, the way clay does before it cracks. By whom? The Gala was the annual fundraiser for the Meridian Arts Foundation, held every year in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto. It was the kind of event where old money wore new suits and called it philanthropy. The tickets started at $3,000. The tables started at 30. Adwoa had not purchased a ticket because she had purchased a table. 12 seats, centerpiece included, hosted by Asante Capital Group, whose logo appeared in silver foil on the back of the evening's program. She did not explain this. Not yet. "I was invited by the foundation," she said simply. The woman in the cream blazer looked her over with the slow, unhurried attention of someone who has never once doubted her own authority. Her gaze moved from Adwoa's face to her dress, a midnight blue silk that had been chosen with particular care, and then back up, and something in her expression settled into certainty, the kind that has nothing to do with evidence. "The foundation sends invitations to donors," the woman said. "Are you here with someone's party?" There was a man standing slightly behind the woman, a man with silver at his temples and the look of someone who has spent decades being vaguely apologetic for his wife in social situations. He touched her elbow. She ignored him. "Helene," he said quietly. Helene ignored him again. She was looking at Adwoa with the patient confidence of someone who had never been wrong about this kind of thing, who had walked into rooms like this for 30 years and always known exactly who belonged and who did not. What happened next took perhaps 4 seconds. Helene Vanthorpe reached out and took the small clutch bag from Adwoa's hand. Not violently. Almost conversationally, the way you might pick up something a child has left somewhere inconvenient. She turned it over, as though looking for some verification of identity, and then held it out to the man behind her. "Would you check the guest list at the door, Gerald?" she said to the man. "I think there may have been a mistake." The ballroom around them had gone quiet in that particular way that means people are listening while pretending not to. Adwoa was aware of faces turned at angles. She was aware of a young woman in a black gown 3 tables away who had frozen mid-sip. She was aware of the string quartet in the corner, which had not stopped playing but whose music suddenly felt very far away. Gerald took the clutch with the expression of a man who had long ago stopped choosing his battles. And then he looked at Adwoa properly, for the first time, and something crossed his face, a flash of something that might have been recognition. "Helene," he said again, and this time his voice was different. But Helene Vanthorpe was already turning back toward Adwoa, drawing herself up in the way that people do when they are preparing to be gracious about someone else's embarrassment. She had made her assessment. She had acted on it. In her mind, the matter was in the process of being resolved. Adwoa looked at her for a long moment. She did not raise her voice. She did not reach for her clutch. She did not look around the room for validation or support. She had been in rooms like this before. She had been looked at like this before. She had learned, over the course of 43 years, and in particular over the last 12 of them, that the most powerful thing she owned was her own stillness. She took her phone from the small pocket inside her jacket, the phone she'd switched to when she put the clutch down on the table to get a drink, and she made a call. It rang twice. The person on the other end picked up and said, "Yes? It's Adwoa," she said. I need you to hold the Meridian transfer until I call you back." She ended the call, picked up her drink from the table beside her, and walked toward the exit of the ballroom without looking back. The story of how Adwoa Asante Boadi came to be standing in that ballroom at all was not the kind of story that starts with privilege. It starts with a kitchen in Scarborough, a kitchen with a window that looked out onto a parking lot, and a mother who worked nights at a food processing plant and days at a dry cleaner on Kingston Road. It starts with a second-hand Texas Instruments calculator and a library card so used the laminate had started to peel at the corner. Adwoa had been the kind of child who did not have the vocabulary yet to call herself ambitious, so she called it curiosity. She was curious about how things worked. She was curious about money, not in the way that children who grow up with money are curious. As a fact of life, something managed and inherited and discussed in certain tones, but in the way that children who grow up without it are curious. As a system, as a logic, as a set of rules that someone had designed and that could, in theory, be understood and navigated. She had won a partial scholarship to the University of Toronto at 17. She had worked the rest, waiting tables at a restaurant in the market, tutoring undergraduates in first-year economics, doing data entry for a small accounting firm in the evenings. She had graduated with distinction and a debt load that took 6 years to clear. She had started her first company at 28 in a one-bedroom apartment in Parkdale, with a used laptop and a Google Workspace account. That company, a logistics software firm called Gatewave Technologies, had sold to a European infrastructure group when Adwoa was 34 for a figure that appeared in the business pages of the Globe and Mail under the headline, "Scarborough-born founder's quiet exit makes waves." She had invested the proceeds carefully, built Asante Capital Group over the following 5 years, and was now, at 43, the managing director of a private investment firm that controlled just under $2 billion in assets and had offices in Toronto, Calgary, and London. She had a house in Rosedale with a garden she never had enough time to tend properly. She had a daughter at McGill studying biochemistry. She had a mother who had long since stopped working nights and who had a condo in Pickering that Adwoa had bought her 3 years ago, and who spent her evenings watching nature documentaries and video calling her sisters in Accra. None of this was visible on Adwoa's face when she walked into the Fairmont Royal York that evening. None of it was supposed to be. She had not worn her money to the event. She had worn a dress and a pair of earrings and the quiet, self-contained expression of someone who is there to have a good evening and do some useful business and perhaps enjoy the appetizers. The Meridian Arts Foundation had been one of Asante Capital's charitable commitments for 2 years. Adwoa had attended the gala the year before without incident. She had contributed $1 million to the foundation's endowment fund. She was, in the language of that world, a significant donor. Her company's name was in silver foil on the back of the program. She had arrived slightly later than planned because of a call that ran long with her legal team in London. She had come in through the main entrance, collected her table card, and was walking toward her assigned table when Helene Vanthorpe had spoken. Gerald Vanthorpe found her in the corridor outside the ballroom. He was moving quickly for a man who looked as though he had not moved quickly in some time, and his face had shed the vague apology of earlier and replaced it with something closer to genuine alarm. "Mrs. Asante Boadi," he said, I want to sincerely apologize for what just occurred." Adwoa looked at him. Gerald Vanthorpe was, she knew, the former chair of one of the mid-size engineering firms that had been quietly circling Asante Capital's portfolio for the past 4 months. His company, Vanthorpe and Associates, had been attempting to secure a capital injection of around $80 million. His people had been in conversation with her people. The preliminary documents had been on her desk for 6 weeks. "Mr. Vanthorpe," she said. What she did was completely. He stopped. He seemed to be having difficulty selecting the correct word from the available options. It was wrong. It was unacceptable. She didn't know. "I know she didn't know," Adwoa said. There was a pause. "The apology," she continued, would carry more weight if the reason for it were that what happened was wrong in itself, not that it turned out to be inconvenient. Gerald Vanthorpe opened his mouth and then closed it again. Adwoa thought, not unkindly, that he was probably not accustomed to having the subtext of an apology named this plainly. "Of course," he said. "Of course, that's right. I understand that. I appreciate you coming to find me," she said. She meant it in a limited way. It had taken something, she acknowledged, to leave the room and seek her out. She was not in the habit of dismissing the limited things. "The Foundation's work matters to me," she said. "That hasn't changed. But I've asked my team to pause the transfer pending a review, and I'll be in touch with the board through proper channels." She did not mention the 80 million. She did not need to. Gerald Vanthorpe nodded slowly. He looked, she thought, like a man confronting the gap between the world as he had believed it to be and the world as it actually was, a gap that his wife had just made very, very large. "I hope," he began, "that the business conversation, that's a separate matter," Adwoa said. "My team will follow up." She left him in the corridor and walked out through the side entrance onto Wellington Street. The air was cool in the way that Toronto in late October is cool, that particular clear cold that Adwoa had grown up with and still found bracing in a way she liked. She stood on the steps for a moment and breathed it in. Her phone buzzed. Her chief of staff from the brief two-word text Adwoa had sent from the ballroom. "Status?" Adwoa typed back, "Hold Meridian. I'll brief you tomorrow. Also flag Vanthorpe file for full review." She put the phone in her pocket and went to find her car. The call with her lawyer came the next morning, a Tuesday, in the clean gray light of Adwoa's home office in Rosedale. Her lawyer, a meticulous woman named Constance Ossie, who had gone to Osgood the same year Adwoa was starting Gatewave, listened without interruption while Adwoa described what had happened. When Adwoa finished, Constance was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to pursue anything formally?" she asked. "Not yet," Adwoa said. "I want to understand what I want first." "That's fair," Constance said. What Adwoa wanted, she found when she sat with the question quietly over the following 2 days, was not revenge in the sense the word usually implied. She was not interested in a dramatic confrontation, not interested in a public scene. What she wanted was something more structural. She wanted the record to be accurate. The Meridian Arts Foundation was contacted on Wednesday by Asante Capital's communications director, who informed the executive director that the company was withdrawing its pledge for the current fiscal year, pending a review of the foundation's governance policies and event conduct protocols. The executive director called Adwoa directly within the hour. The call was long and, on the executive director's end, increasingly uncomfortable. He apologized 3 times. He explained that the Vanthorpes were long-standing patrons. He used the phrase, "deeply unfortunate incident," twice. Adwoa let him talk. When he had finished, she said that she appreciated the call and that her team would be in touch about the conditions under which a reconsidered donation might be possible. And she ended the call without raising her voice. The Globe and Mail ran a piece on Thursday. Adwoa had not called anyone at the paper. She had simply, when a journalist she knew asked her how the Meridian Gala had been, told the truth, that she had attended, that she had been asked to account for her presence in a way that no one else at the event had been asked, that her personal belongings had been handled without her consent, and that she had left early. She said it the way she said most things, without decoration, and the journalist had enough experience to hear what was underneath it. The headline read, "Prominent Toronto investor leaves Meridian Gala after incident with longtime patron family." The piece did not name Helene Vanthorpe directly. It did not need to. The Toronto business community was not a large place. The story, as it moved through that community in the days that followed, underwent the transformation that stories always undergo. Some people, hearing it, were not surprised. And that lack of surprise said something. Some people, hearing it, expressed shock and concern in the particular way that people express shock and concern when they have been given a clear opportunity to align themselves with the correct side of a situation without any personal risk. Adwoa was aware of all of this. She watched it from a measured distance, the way she had learned to watch most things that happened around her name. What she was less prepared for was the note. It arrived on a Friday afternoon by courier, in an envelope addressed in handwriting that was very precise and very old-fashioned. Inside was a single card with the Vanthorpe family name embossed at the top, and below it, in the same precise handwriting, Ms. Asante Boadi. I have been informed that the apology offered to you at the event was inadequate and misdirected. This note is intended to offer the correct one. What I did was wrong, not because of who you are, because it was wrong. I do not expect this to make a material difference to anything. I am sending it because it is true. H. Vanthorpe. Adwoa read it twice. Then she set it on her desk and looked out the window at the garden, which was losing its leaves in the earnest, methodical way that Toronto gardens do in October, as though they have decided that if they are going to do this, they are going to do it properly. She thought about what the note meant and what it didn't mean, and she found that she held both things at once without difficulty. It meant that somewhere inside the woman in the cream blazer, something had shifted. It didn't mean that the shift was permanent, or that it extended beyond the specific and immediate consequences of this particular incident. Both things could be true. They usually were. She put the note in the folder on her desk, where she kept things she was not ready to decide about. The Vanthorpe and Associates file was reviewed by Adwoa's team over the following 3 weeks, with the same rigor they applied to every file. The numbers were looked at carefully. The risk profile was assessed. The strategic fit was evaluated on its merits. On a Wednesday morning in November, Adwoa's chief of staff, a precise man named Kwiku, who had been with her for 4 years, set the final assessment on her desk. He did not offer an opinion. He knew she would form her own. She read it over lunch, a sandwich from the deli on Yonge that she had been going to since the Gatewave days, eaten at her desk while she read. When she finished, she put the document down and thought for a while. The investment, assessed on its merits, was marginal, not bad, not compelling, the kind of deal that, in a different context, she might have taken a small position in out of strategic courtesy. The kind of deal that, in this context, she was going to decline. She drafted the letter herself, which was unusual. Typically, these communications went through Kweku and the legal team. But she wanted to write this one. It was brief. It noted that after thorough review, Asante Capital Group had determined that the investment opportunity did not align with the firm's current strategic priorities. It thanked the Vanthorpe and Associates team for the time invested in the process. It wished them well in securing the capital through alternative channels. It did not say anything else. It did not need to. She sent it on a Thursday. She heard nothing back from Gerald Vanthorpe. She had not expected to. 6 months later, on a Wednesday in April, that arrived with that particular Toronto spring quality, gray and tentative, and then suddenly, by afternoon, inexplicably warm. Adwoa was asked to speak at a luncheon hosted by a coalition of Black women in Canadian business. The event was at a hotel in the financial district, and the room held about 200 people, and Adwoa had agreed to it because she thought it mattered, and because she had, as she had gotten older, become less comfortable with the gap between believing something matters and doing nothing about it. She spoke for about 20 minutes. She talked about Scarborough and the library card and the Texas Instruments calculator. She talked about Gatewave, about the years of eating lunch at her desk in a Parkdale apartment while the platform was being built. She talked about the specific texture of being underestimated, which she described not as an injury but as information. Information about the room, about who was in it, about what you were walking into and what you were working against. She did not tell the story of the gala, not in any detail, but she said something that the women in the room would remember afterward, in the particular way that things get remembered when they land exactly where they were aimed. She said, "The most expensive thing a person can carry into a room is contempt, not for others, though that too, but contempt for the possibility that the world can be other than what you've decided it already is. That contempt costs you in ways you don't see until the bill arrives. And sometimes the bill is very large." She paused. she said. I have seen the bill arrive. It is not a satisfying thing to watch, but it is an accurate one. The room was quiet for a moment after that, the kind of quiet that comes not from discomfort but from recognition. Then it came back to life. Afterward, in the corridor outside the event room, a young woman came to find her. She was perhaps 26, wearing a blazer she had clearly bought for occasions like this, still not quite at ease in it. She had the particular look of someone who is trying to memorize a conversation while it is still happening. I grew up in Scarborough, the young woman said. Ajax, actually. Close enough. Close enough, Adwoa agreed. I'm building something, the young woman said. Early stage, logistics tech. She said it the way people say things they are slightly afraid to say out loud. Adwoa looked at her for a moment. She thought about a parking lot in Scarborough and a library card and a calculator. She thought about the first time she had said the words "I'm building something" out loud in a coffee shop on Queen Street to a friend who had nodded encouragingly and not fully understood. Send me a deck, Adwoa said. She took one of her cards from her jacket pocket and held it out. The young woman took it with both hands. I will, she said. Thank you. Adwoa walked back out into the April afternoon, into the gray and warm air of a Toronto spring, into the city that had given her a library card and a parking lot view, and a mother who worked nights and a foundation she had built herself, piece by piece in the years since. She had a 3 o'clock call with her London team and a 4:30 with a firm in Vancouver that was asking about a seed position in a materials science startup. She had a daughter who had texted that morning about a paper on enzyme catalysis that Adwoa had only partially understood and been delighted by. She had a garden in Rosedale that was, she had noticed that morning, beginning to come back. She put on her sunglasses and walked toward her car, and she thought, this is what you build. Not the moment of reversal, not the bill arriving, not the things that correct themselves with the weight of their own error. This, the next call, the young woman with the blazer, the April afternoon, the continuing. That was the thing that no one could take out of your hands.